How many of y'all think he was playing? How many of y'all think he meant to kill David? Sure he did. Not only that, let's go a step further. Notice in verse number 19, or chapter 19, look at verse 1. And Saul spake to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. He's telling everybody in the court, if you get a chance, kill him. See, jealousy makes you a murderer eventually. Jealousy will either drive you crazy. You may not ever murder them with your hands, but you will in your mind. And what do we find in the book of James? If we think about it, it's just as bad as if we do it. We've murdered, how many people does John talk about we've murdered in our mind? So he's a murderer. Saul went from being a liar, a disobedient, blaming others, and now he's an out-and-out murderer. You said, preacher, well, David fled. When Saul threw that spear, he was a murderer. He didn't throw a spear to play with him. He threw a spear to kill him. Not only that, notice another lie. Verse 4 and verse 5. Jonathan's trying to get where David can come back home. You throw a spear at me once. How many of y'all going to go back for the second time? Goody, goody, goody. I'm going to go get thrown out again. But notice verse 4 and verse 5. And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works had been to thee were very good. For he put his life in his hand and slew the Philistine. He went down to get Goliath by himself. Well, you were cowering in your tent, Dad. Don't you remember that? David didn't have to go down there. We could all be in the Philistine rule right now. But no, David took it upon himself. And David went down there and David had himself a time. That didn't fit in with their conversation. For the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. Thou sawest it, didst rejoice. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood to slay David without a cause? And what does he do? And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul sware, As the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. Sounds good. Verse 8, there's war. David goes out and leads the war. David brings victory and comes back. Evil spirit comes upon him in verse 9. And he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his harp. And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with the javelin, but he slipped away out of his presence. He threw the spear again. Why? Because Saul was lying when he said to come back home. He only let him come back home for one reason. He was hiding at the beginning of chapter 19. Saul didn't know where he was. Saul's going to spend the latter part of his entire reign chasing David. Of all the things he could do, all the great things he could have done for Israel, he's going to spend the latter years of his kingdom chasing. And David makes the reference later. He's so insignificant. He said, why are you chasing a dead dog? Why are you chasing a flea? I'm nothing in the realm of the world. Why are you chasing a flea? Now, we understand something about a flea. A flea's small and insignificant unless you got one. My wife's two dogs cannot stand a flea. They will literally have a conniption over a flea. Lord only knows what would happen if they ever had two on them at once. They can't handle one. A flea just totally drives them nuts. Saul had a flea, small and insignificant, unless you have one. You know, it's sort of like, in our neck of the woods. You know, a flea don't stay on us. We don't have the hair to hold it. But you stop and you think a chigger, a small chigger. A chigger is small and insignificant, unless you got one. That thing will itch you and itch you and itch you, and you will scratch it, and blood will come out, and you are still scratching it. Something you can barely see. I can't, my eyes are no longer able to focus like that. But people with good eyes can barely see them without a magnifying glass. They're small and insignificant unless you got one. David is nothing. He's just a flea. But Saul had one. His spirit of jealousy drove him crazy. You know, when we hear good things that God's doing in people's ministry, don't get jealous about it. Because I want to tell you a secret real quick. God's blessings don't always come at one time. You may be blessed this month, and you may go 3 months wishing you could see another blessing. This way God works. Nobody is blessed every day of their life. In comparison, you're going to have mountaintops and valleys. You're going to go up one side of the mountain, you're going to go down one side of the mountain. You're going to have great days, and you're going to have not so good days. You're going to have days that you're going to be praying that will end. But don't be jealous because God's blessing somebody down the road. Don't be jealous because God's doing it. Because then that puts us where Saul got in at. Because what ends up happening is we start thinking bad things. Then we start saying bad things. Jealousy. Jealousy gets us in so much trouble. Saul did some things in his life to get in the position to be jealous. Saul was chosen to be the king of Israel. His name will always be tied to the throne of Israel. Can I ask you a question? Let's play for just a minute. Who was the first president of the United States? Honest president. Every time Congress met before, they had to have one elected by the representatives that were there during the Constitution. So if you want to be very technical, yes, there was other presidents of the United States nominated by Congress for that season where they met and did the Constitution. The first actual people elected president of the United States, George Washington. Everybody agree with that? Most people, if you ask most college kids today, you want the number one answer is? Ben Franklin, because he's on a $100 bill. Who was the first Speaker of the House? I don't know. 90% of America can't name the first Supreme Court justice. Who was the president that took over after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated? See how those presidents sort of just blur? Who was the first king of Israel? And everybody knows it's Saul. There's no argument. The greatest king of Israel, I'm still going to say, was David. Well, it's Solomon. Solomon had the chance to be. Solomon, in my estimation, he blew up when it was over with, but that's okay. But think about it. Think about it. I want you to get this. Saul is still recognized as the first king of Israel. That was not a small position God had him set aside for. It was a chance to begin government. It was a chance to begin a military force. It was a chance to begin to take from Samuel the wisdom Samuel had and instill it in laws throughout the land that the Word of God could be promoted in every aspect of our life. Saul had a great position, but he made bad choices and then let jealousy eat him alive. People, jealousy will eat you faster than anything. It'll eat you faster than anger. Jealousy. Can you believe what they have? They done went out and whatever it is you're jealous about. But you know what? What's the old saying? The grass is always greener, but it's just as hard to mow. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you a freebie real quick. If it's not mowed in Louisiana, weeds take over real fast. If you don't believe me, drive by a field that's been sitting a couple of months and watch the sow thistle begin to grow in it. It takes a little while to get above the grass. But it isn't low for you drive by and you think, man, within 6 weeks, man, it's 5 foot tall. And it's like, when's the last time they mowed that? Oh, they mowed it last month. Okay, I got it. What I'm trying to say is don't be jealous. Don't be envious. You know why? God's been so good to us. What do we have to be jealous for? How many of y'all right now could get a hold of God if you had to right now? It's called living for God each and every day. The world don't have that. Why should we be jealous of them? But preacher, I know. I'm like Johnny Bravo in the cartoons too. I want and need. I want and need. I want. But you know what? Sometimes our wants are not really our needs. God keeps a roof above our head, food in the refrigerator, in the freezer, and on the table. Think about what all God's given us, and why are we jealous of somebody else?